It's 3:14 a.m., the dead hour, as we like to call it in the hospital. There's something about that time that makes the hair on the back of your neck prickle, the air grow colder, and the shadows stretch just a bit too far. In my 6 years working the night shift as a nurse, I've gotten used to the eerie stillness. Used to it, but never quite comfortable. The halls of St. Vincent's are always too quiet at this hour. The soft hum of fluorescent lights, the occasional beeping from monitors, and the faint shuffling of shoes on linoleum tiles are the only sounds that break the silence. The patients are mostly asleep, most of them anyway. I had 3 patients tonight. Mrs. Turner in room 204, recovering from a stroke. Mr. Perez in 206, an elderly man with pneumonia. And then there was the boy in 210, a transfer from the pediatric wing. He'd been in a coma for 2 weeks, following a car accident. His parents, heartbroken and desperate, had insisted he stay close, rather than be transferred to a long-term care facility. His room always had an unsettling energy. There were no machines attached to him, just the steady rise and fall of his chest. But something about that room felt wrong. It was around 3:00 when I first noticed something off. I was at the nurse's station, sipping coffee and absent-mindedly scrolling through patient charts when the lights flickered. Not unusual, this old hospital had wiring issues. But when they came back on, the air felt heavier. I tried to shake it off and went about my rounds. Mrs. Turner was sleeping peacefully, her thin chest rising and falling in a soft rhythm. Mr. Perez, though his breathing was labored, seemed stable. I was heading to the boy's room in 210 when I heard it. Whispers. Soft, almost indiscernible, but definitely there. I stopped in the hallway, my heart rate spiking, and listened carefully. It sounded like a conversation between 2 people, but I couldn't make out the words. The hair on my arm stood up, and I slowly turned my head toward the source. The sound was coming from room 210. My feet felt rooted to the spot. Every rational part of my brain told me that this was absurd. No one should be in there with the boy. His parents had left hours ago, and I hadn't seen any visitors since. The whispers stopped abruptly, leaving behind a suffocating silence. I exhaled shakily and forced myself to walk toward the door. It was slightly ajar, which was odd because I distinctly remembered closing it earlier. I pushed it open with a trembling hand, and the room was dark. That was the first thing that struck me. The lights in every other room were bright, humming with that sterile hospital glow. But not here. The dim light from the hallway barely cut through the shadow inside. I stepped into the room, scanning for anything out of place. The boy lay still in his bed, as he had for the past 2 weeks. His face pale, his body motionless, except for the shallow rise and fall of his chest. But there was something in the corner. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, or maybe my tired mind playing games with me. But the longer I stared, the more certain I became that there was a figure standing there. It wasn't moving, wasn't making a sound, but I could feel its presence. A cold, oppressive weight pressing down on me. My heart pounded, and my skin prickled with fear. "Who's there?" My voice was barely a whisper, shaking with an uncertainty I didn't want to admit to. The figure didn't move. For a moment I considered turning around and walking out, pretending I hadn't seen anything. But my legs wouldn't carry me. My instincts as a nurse screamed at me to protect the boy, even though my mind was screaming at me to run. I took a hesitant step closer, squinting into the darkness. That's when I realized it wasn't just a shadow. The figure had eyes. 2 pale, glowing eyes staring at me from the darkness. My breath caught in my throat, and I took an involuntary step back. The eyes were fixed on me, unblinking, unwavering. And then, in the silence of the room, I heard the whispering again. But this time, it was clearer. It wasn't 2 voices. It was many. A cacophony of soft, urgent murmurs all layered on top of each other, speaking in a language I couldn't understand. It seemed to be coming from the figure, no, not the figure itself, but from around it, as if the air itself was speaking. "Help me!" The voice that broke through the whispers wasn't my own. It wasn't even human. It was something low and gravelly, crawling through the air toward me. My entire body tensed as I tried to locate the source. Suddenly, the boy's monitors flatlined. The room was flooded with that shrill, high-pitched tone that sends every nurse into action. But I couldn't move. The figure in the corner seemed to grow darker, denser, as if it was feeding off the sound. The boy's chest stopped rising. And then, as abruptly as it started, the sound cut out. I blinked and the room was bright again. The lights were back, the shadows gone. The figure was no longer in the corner, and the boy's chest was rising and falling like normal, his monitors beeping rhythmically. I staggered back, breathless, unsure of what had just happened. I rushed to check his vitals. Everything was fine. But something in my gut told me that it wasn't over. I didn't sleep the next day. How could I? The image of those pale, glowing eyes burned into my mind. I told myself it was just stress, exhaustion playing tricks on me. But the next night, things got worse. 3-0 came, and with it, the whispers. This time, I was ready, or so I thought. I stayed at the nurse's station, refusing to go near room 210. But the sound grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't just a cacophony now, it was a chorus. And they were calling my name. I stood up, heart racing, when I saw a shape at the end of the hallway. It was the boy. Standing there, impossibly tall, his hospital gown fluttering slightly, though there was no breeze. His eyes were wide and vacant, the same eerie pale glow I had seen in the figure. "Help me," he said again, but it wasn't his voice. It was that same low, gravelly tone. The thing that had spoken to me in his room the night before. I took a step back, but my legs felt weak. I was shaking uncontrollably. The boy started walking toward me, his movements slow and jerky, like a puppet on strings. His eyes never left mine. Behind him, the shadows seemed to writhe, growing thicker and darker as he approached. I wanted to scream, but my throat closed up, choking off any sound. I turned and ran, blindly sprinting down the hallway, not caring where I was going. I ended up in the stairwell, the heavy door slamming shut behind me. My chest heaved as I struggled to catch my breath. For a moment, there was silence. Blessed silence. Then, the door creaked open. I didn't dare turn around. I didn't need to. I could feel the presence from room 210. It was behind me. I could hear the soft shuffle of bare feet on the concrete floor, growing closer. And the whispers. Always the whispers. I closed my eyes, tears streaming down my face, and whispered a prayer. I'm not even religious, but in that moment, I didn't know what else to do. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the noise stopped. I opened my eyes and turned around. The stairwell was empty. The door was closed. But I knew deep down that whatever was haunting the boy wasn't gone. It was waiting, watching. I transferred off the night shift the next day. No one asked why. No one ever does. They all know, we all know,